On a cold winter morning in a quiet mountain town called Silver Ridge, a man searching for peace stumbled upon a storm he could never walk away from. It all began with one cruel kick, a spoiled rich kid, a wounded German shepherd, and a stranger who refused to stay silent. What followed was a battle between power and justice, greed and compassion, and the miracle that only love and courage could bring. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Because tonight, somewhere between the snow and the silence, you'll see how one act of kindness can change everything. Snow fell over Silver Ridge like sifted glass, dusting the valley in silent grace. The town, nestled between the white-shouldered Rockies, seemed frozen in a photograph, smokestacks rising from old brick chimneys, pine trees bowing under the burden of ice, and a faint golden glow leaking from the windows of Maple Hearth Diner. It was the kind of winter morning that made time hold its breath. Ethan Ward drove into town with the quiet wariness of a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. 36 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying the steady composure of a soldier who'd lived through storms far worse than snow, he wore a heavy brown coat, black gloves, and a scarf faded from years of field duty. His eyes, gray like steel beneath clouds, betrayed exhaustion but also discipline, as if every movement was still measured in combat rhythm. A decade in the Navy SEALs had carved sharp lines along his jaw and deeper ones in his soul. The last mission in Kandahar had cost him more than a scar across his ribs. It had taken his team, his peace, and perhaps his belief that the world could still be gentle. He'd come to Silver Ridge for quiet, a small cabin near the edge of the forest, a promise of silence, a chance to learn what it meant to live without waiting for the next explosion. But that morning, as he parked beside the snowy main street and stepped into the biting air, he realized that peace, like war, had its own kind of ambush. Down the street, in front of Holloway Veterinary Clinic, two voices clashed through the snow. Grace Holloway stood on the wooden porch, her gloved hands trembling not from the cold, but from anger barely contained. She was in her early 30s, with chestnut hair tied in a loose braid and a wool coat the color of midnight. Her eyes, warm hazel flecked with green, held the kind of kindness that came from tending to the broken. Yet beneath that softness was resilience, the kind forged by loss. Her father, Dr. Thomas Holloway, had built this clinic decades ago, believing that animals healed people as much as people healed animals. After his passing last year, Grace had fought to keep it running alone. The town admired her quiet strength, everyone except the ones who saw land as something to buy and own. Across from her stood Logan Pierce, barely 22, but already infected with the arrogance of his father, Gordon Pierce, the richest developer in Silver Ridge. Logan was tall, lean, and always dressed as if stepping out of a magazine shoot. Black coat, leather gloves, expensive boots never meant for snow. His smile never reached his eyes, which carried the casual cruelty of those who'd never known consequences. He pointed a gloved hand at Grace. "You can't just ignore the future, Dr. Holloway," he said, his tone dripping entitlement. "My father's resort will bring jobs, tourists, actual progress. You're the only one holding it up with this animal shelter nonsense." Grace folded her arms, her breath visible in the freezing air. "This clinic isn't nonsense. It's part of the town, part of what your father's trying to destroy." At her side stood Ranger, her German shepherd, a 5-year-old sable-coated male with intelligent amber eyes and a scar running across his left flank from an old rescue mission. Ranger wasn't just her companion, he was her heartbeat after grief. Large, poised, and silent until provoked, he sensed tension like weather. His fur bristled now, his gaze locked on Logan. Ethan stopped near the curb, his instincts alerting him before reason could catch up. It was the look in the dog's eyes, focused, protective, not aggressive, that made him step closer. Logan sneered. "You and your mutt think you own this place? You should know your place, Dr. Holloway." He moved as if to step past her, brushing her shoulder. Ranger growled, low and warning. "Call him off," Logan barked, his pride flaring red. Grace's voice trembled. "Ranger, stay." But the boy's fury blinded him. He drew back his boot and, before Ethan could move, kicked Ranger square in the ribs. The sound was dull, cruel, final. Ranger yelped, stumbling sideways into the snow. Grace gasped, rushing to his side. Ethan was beside them in 2 strides. Logan turned to sneer, but the expression froze when he saw Ethan's eyes. The soldier didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, like a thunderhead over a still lake. "Step back," Ethan said quietly. His tone was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of command. "You don't kick a defenseless animal, not here, not ever," Logan scoffed. "Who are you, some kind of hero?" Ethan's voice dropped to a colder register. "No, but I've buried better men for less." A flicker of fear crossed the young man's face. He hesitated, then spat into the snow. "This town's changing, old man. People like you and her, just roadblocks." He turned, boots crunching against the ice, and disappeared into the falling snow. For a moment, the street was silent, except for the wind whispering through the pines. Grace knelt beside Ranger, checking his side. "Easy, boy. I'm here." Her voice softened, trembling with the weight of helpless anger. "You're okay. You're okay." Ethan crouched down opposite her. No broken ribs, just bruising. "But you should get him inside. Keep him warm." Grace looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. "Thank you, Mr. Ward, Ethan Ward." Recognition flickered across her face. "You're the Navy SEAL who bought the cabin by the ridge." "Was hoping to stay unnoticed," he said with a faint, tired half-smile. "You picked the wrong town for that." She tried to smile back, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she lifted Ranger's collar gently. Ethan offered his arm without a word, helping her guide the dog inside the clinic. The warm scent of antiseptic and cedar greeted them. A small wood stove burned in the corner, and framed photos lined the walls, her father, her younger self holding a rescued fawn, and a plaque that read, "Healing begins with kindness." Ethan stood quietly as Grace treated Ranger, pressing a warm compress to the bruise. The dog leaned into her touch, his breathing steadying. "He's strong," Ethan said. Grace smiled faintly. "He's been through worse. Found him 3 winters ago, trapped near the riverbank. He stayed by the body of another dog for 2 days before I got there. Never left its side." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding more than words could tell. Loyalty like that didn't fade. It just found new forms. Outside, the snow thickened, swirling past the window like ghosts of memory. Ethan glanced toward the road where Logan had vanished. "That kid, he'll cause more trouble." Grace sighed. "He already has. His father's been trying to buy this land for years. My father said no, and ever since his death, things have gotten harder. Permits delayed, strange inspections, people canceling appointments. I don't know how much longer I can hold out." Ethan said nothing, but the soldier in him, the man who had seen tyranny wear expensive suits, was already awake again. When he finally left the clinic, the world outside was silent except for the crunch of his boots and the distant howl of the wind. The sun had already begun to set behind the ridge, painting the snow in hues of fading gold. He stopped, looked back once at the small wooden sign above the clinic door, and exhaled a slow breath that turned to mist. Somewhere deep inside, the stillness he came for began to crack. For peace, it seemed, had a way of testing whether you truly deserved it. Snow fell heavier over Silver Ridge that week, turning the mountain town into a painting half erased by wind. By dawn, roofs sagged under white weight, and every sound seemed muffled, as if the world were afraid to speak too loudly. Ethan Ward had started to learn the rhythm of silence again, the creak of old wood in his rented cabin, the crackle of fire, and the distant bark of a dog that reminded him of Ranger. But silence, he knew, was never permanent. It only waited for what would disturb it. He spent the next few mornings helping around town, fixing fences for old Mr. Larkin, repairing the frozen pipe at the Maple Hearth Diner. People began to nod at him with cautious gratitude, the way small towns welcome strangers who prove useful but still hold secrets. Yet, wherever he went, the name Pierce followed like an echo, spoken with respect, fear, or disgust, depending on who you asked. Gordon Pierce owned half the valley. His son Logan, though young, acted as if he owned the rest. Ethan didn't want trouble, but trouble had already noticed him. One afternoon, gray skies pressed low as he walked toward Holloway Veterinary Clinic. Smoke curled gently from its chimney. Through the frosted windows, he could see Grace moving about, focused, graceful in motion, her braid tucked under a knitted cap. Ranger lay beside the counter, resting but watchful. The dog's ribs had healed quickly, but his spirit hadn't dimmed. Grace looked up when Ethan entered, shaking off snow. "You're back," she said with a faint smile. "I promised I'd check on the patient," he replied. "He's fine, stronger than me, most days." The clinic smelled of antiseptic and cedar, but underneath was the scent of hay and warmth, a sanctuary against the winter. Ethan helped her lift a crate of supplies, and for a moment, the quiet between them felt easy. Then Grace spoke softly. "You know, since that day with Logan, things have gotten worse." Ethan paused, his brow tightening. "How so?" She gestured to a small pile of envelopes on the desk, stamped with county seals and threats written in neat, bureaucratic language. Noise complaints, inspection notices, even one saying I owe back taxes for a road that doesn't exist. She gave a humorless laugh. "It's absurd, but it's meant to scare me." Ethan studied the letters. "Paper bullets," he murmured, "the kind that hit deeper than real ones." She looked at him, uncertain if he was joking, but his tone held no irony, only recognition. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge and fog began to creep through the pines, Ethan decided to stay nearby. He said it was just to make sure Ranger got his rest. But the truth was simpler. Something about the town felt wrong. By nightfall, the clinic was cloaked in silence. Grace worked in the back room, cleaning instruments. Ranger dozed by the stove, ears twitching now and then. Ethan sat near the window, a cup of coffee in his hands, his eyes scanning the empty street. He had spent years reading danger in small movements, the twitch of a curtain, the misplaced shadow. That instinct never left him. Around midnight, the power flickered. Once, twice, then returned. Grace glanced up from her work. "Old lines," she said, forcing calm. "Happens during storms." Ethan nodded, but his gaze didn't leave the window. Snow was falling harder now, the wind tracing whispers against the glass. Then, beneath it, a sound, soft but deliberate. A crunch of boots on snow. Ranger's ears pricked up. He growled low, almost imperceptibly. Ethan stood, moving soundlessly toward the door. "Stay here," he murmured. He opened the door slowly, the bell above it giving a faint chime. Outside, the street was empty except for swirling snow. The lamppost across the road flickered, its halo of light trembling. Then he saw it, movement near the back of the building, a silhouette slipping behind the kennels. Ethan stepped into the cold, his boots silent in the drift. He moved like shadow, years of training making him one with the storm. The figure ahead stumbled once, startled by the wind, then darted toward the fence. "Hey!" Ethan called. The figure froze, then bolted. Ethan followed, the chase brief but tense, snow spraying beneath his boots, breath cutting through the icy air. But by the time he rounded the corner, the stranger was gone. Only the echo of footsteps fading into the trees remained. Then he saw it, the back window shattered, glass glinting like shards of moonlight. Across the wall, a smear of crimson paint formed crude letters. "Cellar freeze." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wiped a gloved hand over the words, feeling the tacky wetness of fresh paint. The message wasn't meant to warn, it was meant to mock. Grace appeared behind him, clutching a lantern. Her face went pale at the sight. "Oh my God!" "Go inside," Ethan said firmly. "Lock the doors." She obeyed, though her hands trembled. Ranger stood beside her, barking sharply at the broken window. Ethan scanned the perimeter, every sense on alert, but whoever had been there was gone, vanished into the woods like smoke. Inside, Grace sat on the floor beside Ranger, her breathing shallow. "They won't stop," she whispered. "My father used to get letters too, years ago, when he refused to sell. He said Silver Ridge was built on promises, not profit. I didn't believe him until now." Ethan crouched beside her. He was right. People like Pierce don't stop when they're told no. They escalate until someone stands up. Grace looked at him, eyes glistening. "And what if standing up costs everything?" He hesitated. The question hit something deep. "Then you find out who you really are." Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the stove. Later, after helping her board up the window, Ethan lingered by the door. "I'll check the woods. Tomorrow," he said. "See if I can find tracks." Grace looked exhausted. "You don't have to get involved." He gave a faint smile. "Too late for that." When he finally stepped out into the night, The snow had stopped. The world shimmered under a full moon, pale and distant. Ethan pulled his coat tighter and glanced once more at the painted words behind him. Sell or freeze. He'd faced men who spoke the language of fear before. It was universal, different accents, same poison. But in that quiet, with frost forming along his beard and the ghost of war breathing in his ear, Ethan felt the same pulse he'd known on missions. The moment before, everything changes. The next morning brought a deceptive calm. The sheriff's office called it vandalism by teenagers. Grace didn't argue, though her eyes told Ethan she knew better. Customers began to cancel appointments, murmuring excuses about the weather. A few whispered that Gordon Pierce's men were offering free checkups at their new animal wellness facility down the road. That evening, as twilight bled over the snowy peaks, Grace stood by the window, watching the street. Ranger sat beside her, ears twitching every time a car passed. "They're trying to scare me out," she said. Ethan poured 2 mugs of coffee. "They picked the wrong person to scare." She turned to him. "You don't know me, Ethan." He met her gaze steadily. "I know strength when I see it." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The air between them was warm but heavy with what neither dared admit, that both had been running from ghosts too long. Outside, the wind began to howl again, carrying the promise of another storm. But inside that small clinic, under the flicker of a single lamp, 2 strangers sat quietly, one soldier without a war, one healer without peace, and a loyal dog who refused to sleep until the danger passed. And somewhere beyond the ridge, in a mansion lit by greed, a father and son spoke over brandy, plotting how to break them both. The wind over Silver Ridge carried a strange, hollow hum that morning, the kind that made even the pines whisper of something coming. The storm clouds hung low, bruised purple against the horizon, and the air had that metallic scent Ethan Ward had learned to recognize long ago: trouble. He had spent half the night combing the tree line behind Grace's clinic, tracing faint footprints that led nowhere. Whoever had painted those words, "sell or freeze," knew how to vanish. But Ethan also knew how to wait. He'd learned patience the hard way, lying in deserts for days watching ghosts through a rifle scope. Now, his enemy wore business suits instead of uniforms. Grace was quieter that morning. Her face looked pale under the clinic's yellow lights, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Yet, she still moved with that same deliberate care, checking on Ranger, greeting each client with a soft smile that never fully reached her eyes. Ranger was back to his proud self, alert, calm, his fur sleek again. When Ethan entered, the German shepherd's tail thumped once against the floor. Then he sat up, watching the door as if he, too, expected something unwelcome to arrive. "You didn't sleep," Ethan said, leaning against the counter. Grace smiled faintly. "I didn't plan to. Someone has to keep an eye on things." "Then that someone should at least eat breakfast." He set a small paper bag on her desk. "Maple Hearth Diner. They make coffee strong enough to wake the dead." Grace looked up, almost laughing. "You really don't give up, do you?" "I was trained not to." Their brief moment of levity was broken by the sharp jingle of the front bell. A woman stepped in, shaking snow from her coat. She was in her late 30s, elegant but distant, with a narrow face and eyes the color of winter glass. Her hair, pale blonde, was twisted neatly beneath a black hat, and her movements were too precise, too controlled, like someone rehearsing humanity. "Good morning," she said, her accent faintly Eastern European. "I'm Eleanor Hayes. My cat is very ill. Please, can you see her right away?" Grace's instincts softened instantly. "Of course. Let me take a look." Ethan watched silently. The woman placed a small carrier on the counter. Inside, a long-haired white cat meowed weakly, eyes half closed. Something about the way she avoided Ethan's gaze tugged at his old training reflexes. He stepped closer. "How long has your cat been sick?" Eleanor hesitated, then smiled too quickly. 2 days, maybe 3. I travel often. I just arrived in town last night." Ethan noted the faint chemical scent on her coat, not perfume, but cleaner, sterile, almost industrial. "From where?" "Seattle," she replied smoothly. "Business trip." Grace glared lightly at Ethan, as if to say, "Stop interrogating my client." She lifted the cat gently and carried it to the examination room. "Please wait here, Miss Hayes." Ethan remained by the counter, pretending to flip through a brochure. Eleanor stood still, hands clasped before her, eyes wandering to the photographs on the wall, Grace and her late father, smiling beside rescued animals. There was something almost calculating in the way she studied them. 15 minutes later, Grace returned, brow furrowed. "She's dehydrated but stable. I'll keep her here overnight." Eleanor nodded, expression unreadable. "Thank you, doctor." She glanced at Ethan before leaving, her heels clicking sharp against the wood floor. The bell chimed as she stepped into the snow. Ethan watched her walk away, disappearing behind the curtain of white. Something about her didn't fit. He could feel it, like static before lightning. The next few days passed under uneasy calm. Grace focused on her patients, but fewer people came. Some left without explanation, others avoided eye contact. A rumor spread through town that her clinic had been negligent, that an animal had died under her care. Then, on the third morning, Sheriff Dale Crow arrived. Crow was a broad man in his 50s, with a walrus mustache and a voice that always sounded half amused, half threatening. He wore his badge like an ornament and his authority like armor. Everyone knew he owed his job to Gordon Pierce. "Morning, doctor," he said, stepping inside, his boots leaving wet prints on the floor. "Afraid I've got some bad news." Grace looked up from the counter. "Sheriff," he held up a folder. "Got a formal complaint filed against you. Name's Eleanor Hayes. Claims her cat died from your negligence. Says you gave it the wrong injection." Grace's face went white. "That's not true. The cat was alive when she left it here. She never came back to pick it up. Still, the law's the law. The state board's been notified. Until they review, I have to suspend your license." Ethan stepped forward. "On whose authority?" Crow's eyes flicked toward him. "And you are?" "Ethan Ward. I was here the day that woman came in. You sure you want to shut this place down over one unverified complaint?" Crow's grin didn't reach his eyes. "You're new here, son. In Silver Ridge, we take complaints seriously, especially when the complainant's got powerful friends." Grace's voice shook. "Sheriff, please, you know me. My father helped your dog years ago when he was hit by a truck." "Times change, doctor," he interrupted, dropping the papers on her desk. "And so do loyalties." When he left, the door swung shut with a hollow thud that echoed like a gavel. Grace sank into her chair, staring at the official seal stamped across the suspension order. "This can't be happening." Ethan picked up the papers, scanning them quickly. The signature at the bottom wasn't Crow's usual scrawl. It was cleaner, sharper. Someone else had filled it out. "They forged this," he said quietly. "This isn't just about your clinic anymore." Grace's hands trembled. "Then what is it?" "Pressure," Ethan replied. "They want you scared, isolated, ready to sell. But this kind of precision, this isn't Pierce alone. Someone's helping him from the outside." He turned away, pulling his phone from his pocket. The name he hadn't used in months hovered in his contacts. Commander Vance. When the call connected, the voice on the other end was gravel wrapped in authority. "Ward, thought you'd retired." "I did," Ethan said, "until someone brought the war back to me. I need a background check, Gordon Pierce, Silver Ridge Holdings." A pause. Then, "You poking a hornet's nest, son." "I've been stung before," Vance grunted. "Give me a day." That night, the storm returned. The clinic sat in darkness, the windows glowing faintly from the lanterns Ethan had lit. Grace sat beside Ranger, her hands buried in his fur, staring into the fire. When Ethan's phone buzzed, he stepped outside to answer. The wind howled against his face, sharp as glass. "Ward," Vance's voice came through the static. "You were right to call. Gordon Pierce isn't who he says he is. Real name, Anton Vostok. Changed identities 12 years ago after a European warrant for laundering cartel money went cold. He's using Silver Ridge as a front." Ethan's jaw clenched. "And the woman, Eleanor Hayes? Alias, real name, Irina Petrova. Former intelligence contractor, suspected ties to Russian syndicates. She's been moving between towns tied to Vostok's holdings." Ethan's pulse slowed, focus sharpening. "They're building something bigger here. Whatever it is, it's dirty. Be careful, son. This isn't your battlefield anymore." Ethan ended the call, his breath misting in the cold. Inside, Grace looked up at him expectantly. "Well?" she asked. "They framed you," he said simply. "Pierce is hiding behind another name, The woman with the cat. She's not who she claims to be. Grace's eyes widened, the truth dawning like thunder. Then the complaint. Part of the setup, Ethan said. A perfect trap. Ranger stood, ears raised, sensing the storm outside wasn't the only one closing in. Grace whispered, voice barely audible. What do we do now? Ethan looked toward the snowy hills, where Pierce's mansion glowed faintly in the distance like a fortress of deceit. Now, he said quietly, now we start fighting back. The storm that swept over Silver Ridge did not bring snow alone. It brought silence, the kind that held its breath between trees. The pines of Silver Pines Forest stood like dark sentinels under a full moon, their branches heavy with frost. Somewhere between those trunks, past the frozen creek and the forgotten logging road, an old warehouse crouched in the dark, its roof half collapsed, its windows boarded, and its insides alive with the quiet hum of returning ghosts. Ethan Ward stepped through the door, the crunch of ice under his boots echoing in the vast emptiness. His breath clouded the air, and for a moment he felt the weight of the past pressing against his shoulders. This was the kind of place he thought he'd left behind when he turned in his badge and rifle. Yet here he was again, in the company of shadows that once had names. A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates, his face illuminated by the blue glow of a laptop screen. Deacon Myers, mid-30s, compact build, olive skin, sharp eyes magnified by wire-framed glasses. He was the team's tech ghost, once a cryptography specialist, now an off-grid systems hacker who preferred code to conversation. His humor was dry as desert sand, and his paranoia was a survival instinct earned, not inherited. "You took your time," Deacon muttered without looking up. "I was starting to think you'd gone soft." Ethan smirked. "You know me better than that." From the upper balcony, a second voice cut through the quiet light and teasing. "Careful, Deacon. The last guy who called Ethan soft ended up eating hospital food." Jester Malone, tall and broad-shouldered, descended the stairs with the casual grace of someone who could turn violence into choreography. His blonde hair was tied back, his grin quick and reckless. Once the team's breacher and close-quarters specialist, Jester had a reputation for finding trouble and laughing in its face. He'd been Ethan's right hand during their last deployment, the man who could blow a door open or disarm a bomb with the same unholy glee. "Good to see you, brother," Jester said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Heard you went domestic. A cabin, a quiet town, and a girl. What's next? Knitting?" Ethan gave a faint grin. "Just figured someone should clean up after you." The banter was broken by a metallic click near the window. A rifle bolt eased into place, followed by a low voice. "Eyes front, gentlemen. We're not here for a reunion." Spectre Hale, their sniper, stepped into view. Late 40s, lean as bone, skin weathered like stone, and eyes the color of northern ice. He moved with the slow precision of someone who measured life in heartbeats. Spectre had been a legend even among SEALs. A man who spoke little, but saw everything. He lowered the rifle, nodding once at Ethan. "You found us. Now tell us why." Ethan exhaled, the old rhythm of command slipping back into his voice. "Because I need you. Because Silver Ridge isn't what it looks like. Gordon Pierce, real name Anton Vostok, is running an international laundering ring through the town, and he's got people on his payroll, including the sheriff." Deacon frowned. "We talking small-town graft or global scale?" "Global," Ethan replied. "My contact traced encrypted transactions from Pierce's company to offshore accounts tied to chemical shipments. There's a freighter docking at Silver Lake tomorrow night. Listed cargo, construction materials, real cargo, precursor chemicals for synthetic narcotics." Jester let out a low whistle. "A drug pipeline hidden under a mountain resort. Creative. Evil, but creative." Spectre's gaze remained steady. "And the woman?" "Irina Petrova," Ethan said. "She's the one who framed Grace Holloway, the town vet. Works for Vostok. Used a fake name, fake complaint, real damage." Deacon spun his laptop toward them, fingers flying over the keys. A map appeared on the cracked screen. Lines of code, satellite photos, red dots blinking along the lakeshore. "Been tracking something you'll like," he said. "The freighter Stormlight, owned by a shell company under Vostok's network. Docks here, midnight tomorrow. Security patterns match mercenary profiles, not dock workers. Ethan leaned over the map. We intercept at the lakeside. We take Vostok alive. Jester grinned. And what about the sheriff? Ethan's eyes darkened. He'll answer to the law, real law. For a while, none of them spoke. The sound of wind scraped across the tin roof like restless fingers. Then Grace's name appeared on Deacon's monitor. She was calling. Ethan answered, stepping away. Her voice trembled through the static. Ethan, I think someone's watching the clinic. Ranger keeps barking at the window. I don't know what to do. Lock the doors. Stay inside, Ethan said. I'll send someone. He turned to Jester. Go. Stay with her until I call. Jester nodded once, grabbed his coat, and vanished into the snow. When Ethan hung up, Spectre spoke. You care about her? Ethan didn't answer, but his silence was louder than confession. Hours later, Jester reached the clinic. The snowstorm had begun again, coating the streets in ghostly white. Grace was pacing near the door, lantern in hand. Ranger stood beside her, hackles raised. Ethan sent me, Jester said, flashing a quick grin. You must be the doc who's braver than she looks. Grace didn't smile. There's someone out there. Not anymore, he said, checking the perimeter. You're safe now. But just as he turned back, headlights flared in the distance. A dark SUV rolled to a stop near the edge of the property. The doors opened, and two men in heavy coats stepped out, their posture too stiff to be locals. Get inside, Jester ordered. Grace obeyed, clutching. Ranger's collar, the dog growled, a low warning that vibrated through the floorboards. The men advanced toward the clinic. Jester met them halfway, his movements fluid. One reached for a gun. Jester's fist landed first, swift, silent, efficient. The other lunged, only to be thrown into the snow with a sound that vanished under the wind. Then a voice cut through the night. Enough! From the SUV stepped Mikhail Orlov, a thick-set man with the cold composure of old violence. His coat was black leather, his eyes a pale blue that never blinked. Once Spetsnaz, now muscle for hire. He smiled thinly. We're only here for the doctor. Not tonight, Jester replied. They stood in tense silence, the snow swirling between them. Mikhail's smirk widened. Then tell your friend Ward this is his warning. He turned, motioning to his men. The SUV drove off into the white void, its taillights fading like dying coals. Inside, Grace's hands trembled as she stroked Ranger's head. Who were they? Ghosts from Ethan's past, Jester said softly. And maybe yours now too. Back at the warehouse, the team studied the new data Deacon had intercepted, encrypted messages between Vostok and his suppliers. Spectre adjusted the rifle on his lap. We hit them tomorrow night before the shipment leaves the dock. Ethan nodded. Grace knows the lake tunnels. Her father worked on the drainage systems. She'll show us the underground route. Deacon smirked. So the vets joining the mission didn't see that one coming. Ethan's eyes softened. She has more courage than most soldiers I've met. Outside, the storm built to a roar. Thunder rumbled over the mountains like artillery fire. And somewhere far below, in the sleeping town of Silver Ridge, the first true battle lines were being drawn, between the greed that poisoned the land and the few souls still willing to fight for its heart. The storm came down from the mountains like judgment. By nightfall, Silver Ridge was swallowed whole, a ghost town buried beneath a sea of snow. The wind screamed against rooftops, twisting through the empty streets, while the lake beyond the ridge groaned under the weight of ice. To anyone else, it was the kind of night no sane person would venture into. To Ethan Ward and the Phantom team, it was perfect cover. Inside the abandoned ranger outpost overlooking the lake, the four men stood around a flickering map projected from Deacon's tablet. The holographic outline of the stormlight glowed in blue, its hull long and dark, anchored just beyond the frozen dock. She's here, Deacon said, tapping a line of coordinates. Docked at 2347, right on schedule. Cargo listed as insulated steel beams. Reality check. It's precursor chemicals bound for a synthetic lab in Alaska. We stop it tonight, we shut down the supply chain. Jester grinned, checking his weapons. Just like old times, except colder. Spectre adjusted the scope on his rifle, eyes narrowed. Colder's good. Dead men don't sweat. Ethan studied the map in silence. The weight of the mission pressed like lead on his chest. Not the fear of failure, but the knowledge of what it would cost if they did. "Grace?" he asked. Deacon nodded toward the back of the room. Grace Holloway stood by the window, bundled in a heavy parka, her breath fogging the glass. Her face was pale under the lamplight, but her eyes were steady. Ranger sat by her side, tail sweeping the floor once, twice, as if sensing the gravity of the night ahead. "You don't have to come," Ethan told her. "Yes, I do," she said quietly. "The drainage tunnels my father built. They're the only way under the dock without being seen. You'll need someone who knows them." Ethan's gaze softened. "Then stay behind me at all times. If anything happens, I follow Ranger," she finished. "I know." Outside, the blizzard thickened, swallowing the stars. They moved out at Warspity 15. The world was reduced to wind, snow, and the crunch of boots. Spectre took position on the ridge, rifle steady against the cold. Jester and Deacon ghosted through the service path, disabling cameras and motion sensors one by one. Ethan and Grace reached the tunnel entrance near the old pumping station, a rusted hatch half buried under snow. "Here," Grace said, brushing away the frost. "This leads straight to the lake's underworks." Ethan pried the hatch open. A gust of air escaped, damp and freezing. He descended first, flashlight slicing through the dark. The tunnel smelled of rust and water, its walls glistening with frost. Grace followed, Ranger padding silently beside her, ears alert. Deacon's voice crackled in Ethan's earpiece. "All eyes blind. You're clear to move." They crawled through the narrow shaft until they reached a metal grate, overlooking the docks. Through it, they could see the ship, massive, steel gray. Lights dimmed against the storm. Men in tactical coats unloaded crates into waiting trucks. At the center stood Gordon Pierce, or rather, Anton Vostok, his features half hidden by the snow, but his authority unmistakable. Beside him loomed Mikhail Orlov, the ex-Spetsnaz enforcer, barking orders in Russian. "There's our target," Ethan murmured. "Grace, which pipe leads directly under the pier?" She pointed to a smaller tunnel to their left. "That one connects to the drainage valve below the main platform. From there, you can access the lower hold." "Good. Stay here with Ranger until I signal." But before he could move, the dog tensed, ears flat, teeth bared. A low growl vibrated in the tunnel's still air. Ethan froze. "What is it?" Ranger's head whipped toward the tunnel behind them. Then came the faint echo of boots, too many to be coincidence. Deacon's voice hissed through the comms. "Ethan, they've got heat signatures closing in from the north. Looks like they found your entry." "Jester, already on it," came the reply, followed by distant bursts of suppressed gunfire. "I'll slow them down. Move your ass." Ethan turned to Grace. "Change of plan. We hit them fast." He climbed out of the tunnel, emerging beneath the dock. The air was razor cold. He moved with precision, cutting through the shadows until he reached the underside of the main ramp. Above, the mercenaries were shouting over the roar of the wind, unaware that death was already among them. Jester appeared from the far side, drenched in snow, but grinning like a wolf. "Thought I'd join the party." Together, they scaled the platform. Ethan motioned once, Spectre's signal. A single gunshot cracked through the storm, and one of the guards dropped before his body even hit the ice. Chaos followed. Deacon's voice barked through the channel. "Systems offline. Their radios are dead." The fight exploded in silence. Muzzle flashes bloomed like lightning against the white night. Jester charged the nearest truck, disarming a guard with brutal efficiency. Ethan moved toward Vostok's command post, cutting through opposition with the cold precision of training reborn. On the far edge, Grace and Ranger emerged from the tunnel. The dog darted ahead, weaving through crates, guiding her like an arrow of instinct. But their cover didn't last. From the shadows stepped Mikhail Orlov, towering and calm, his pistol raised. "Dr. Holloway," he said in a thick accent, "you should have stayed out of this." Before Grace could move, Ranger lunged. The German shepherd hit him like a bullet, jaws locking onto his arm. Mikhail roared, slamming his elbow into Ranger's side, trying to shake him loose. The dog didn't let go. Grace screamed, ducking behind a crate. A gunshot split the air, too close. Ethan spun, heart seizing at the sound. He saw Mikhail wrenching free, pistol aimed at the struggling dog. "Ranger!" 3 shots rang out, Clean, controlled, final. Mikhail fell, the snow beneath him turning red. Ethan lowered his weapon, chest heaving. Ranger limped toward him, blood streaking his fur but eyes still fierce. Ethan dropped to one knee, pressing a hand to the dog's neck. "You're okay, buddy, you're okay." The gunfire above dwindled. Spector's voice cut through. "Pierce is down. Repeat, Vostok is in custody." By dawn, the storm began to fade. The white horizon softened, revealing the faint shimmer of emergency lights across the dock. Deacon was already transmitting the encrypted files, evidence of years of smuggling and bribery, to federal servers. The trucks sat abandoned, their contents exposed to the rising sun. Grace stood by the shoreline, the wind whipping her hair, tears freezing on her cheeks. Ethan walked up beside her, Ranger leaning against his leg. "It's over," she whispered. "For now," he said. "But justice doesn't end with arrests. It starts with truth." As the first light spilled over the snow, FBI vehicles approached in a distant line of flashing blue. Ethan watched as the agents took Vostok away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling under the weight of proof. In the stillness that followed, Jester limped over, shaking his head. "You always did know how to pick your vacations, boss." Ethan managed a smile. "Remind me next time to bring sunscreen instead of bullets." The wind eased, the sun broke through, and for the first time in years, Silver Ridge breathed again. When the dawn finally broke over Silver Ridge, it came not with thunder or fanfare, but in a silence so pure it felt like grace itself. The storm had passed. The snow lay deep and glistening over rooftops, catching the first fragile light of morning. The lake that had been a stage for violence now shone like glass, reflecting a sky washed clean. Ethan Ward stood on the ridge above the town, the wind tugging at his coat. Below, the lights of emergency vehicles flickered faintly against the white landscape. He could hear the distant thrum of engines, the clipped voices of federal agents, the mechanical click of handcuffs finding wrists. It was over. Not neatly, not without scars, but over. Beside him, Grace Holloway adjusted the scarf around her neck. Her face was pale but steady. The exhaustion of the past days softened by a quiet resilience. She had been through loss, deceit, and danger. Yet in the pale gold of morning, there was something renewed in her, the look of someone who had survived not just the storm around her, but the one within. Between them sat Ranger, wrapped in a wool blanket. The German shepherd was injured, his left side bound where Mikhail's blow had landed, but he held himself with the same quiet pride as always. His amber eyes followed the movements below, as if he understood the victory, even if not the words. Grace knelt beside him, pressing a gloved hand to his fur. "He saved me," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "He saved more than you know." They stayed that way for a long moment, just watching the sunrise. The ridge glowed in hues of silver and rose, painting the snow with warmth. The cold bit at their cheeks, but it was a clean cold, the kind that came after a fever had broken. Then, behind them, the crunch of footsteps approached. Deacon Myers emerged first, rubbing his hands together for warmth, his ever-present laptop bag slung over one shoulder. Jester Malone followed, limping slightly, a bruise darkening one cheek, but still managing a grin. Spector Hale came last, silent as a shadow, rifle slung over his back. "Looks like our little mountain town's finally getting famous," Jester said, nodding toward the cluster of FBI vehicles below. "Press'll love this. War hero busts crime lord in blizzard." Deacon snorted. "Headlines too long. Need something catchy, maybe cold justice." Spector didn't smile, but the faintest flicker of amusement crossed his eyes. "You two should stick to what you know, making noise and breaking things." Ethan half smiled. "That's why I brought you." The wind gusted, scattering loose snow across their boots. Jester turned serious for a rare moment. "So, what now, boss? We just disappear again?" Ethan looked at him, then out toward the town. "No, this time we stay long enough to see it heal." Deacon raised a brow. "That sounds dangerously like optimism. You feeling all right?" Grace looked up at them, her eyes, warm despite the cold. "Maybe he's right. This town's been under a shadow for too long. It could use people who remember how to fight for something good." "Speak for yourself," Jester said, though there was no bite in it. "Last time I tried being good, I got shot at." Ethan chuckled softly. "And this time? This time I only got bruised. Progress." Ranger gave a faint, approving bark, earning a rare laugh from all of them. Down below, federal agents were loading Anton Vostok, once Gordon Pierce, into a black SUV. The man looked smaller now, stripped of his tailored armor of power. His eyes darted across the snowy expanse, searching for control he no longer had. For a moment, he looked up toward the ridge, as if he could sense Ethan watching him. Then the door closed, and the sound of the engine swallowed the past. By noon, the sky had cleared entirely. Silver Ridge looked reborn, its rooftops white and clean, its air crisp with newness. The townsfolk began to emerge, cautious at first, then with relief. The sheriff's office stood empty. Dale Crow had been taken away that morning, his corruption exposed through Deacon's data trail. Grace's clinic, once boarded up and silent, was alive again. The front window had been replaced, the sign freshly painted. Holloway Veterinary Clinic, healing begins with kindness. Ethan helped her shovel snow from the path, while Ranger, wrapped in a soft bandage, supervised with calm authority. As Grace worked, townspeople stopped by, some offering hot coffee, others simply to thank her. The tension that had once hung over Silver Ridge seemed to melt with the snow. A few even greeted Ethan, nodding in quiet respect. He wasn't the outsider anymore. In the afternoon, a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Commander Vance, the man whose voice had once carried through gunfire and smoke. He was older now, his hair more gray than brown, but his presence still commanded the air. "Ward," he said, shaking Ethan's hand, "hell of a mess you cleaned up here." "Couldn't have done it without you," Ethan replied. Vance's eyes moved to Grace and Ranger. "So, this is the team, huh?" Grace smiled politely. "Not exactly enlisted, sir." Vance gave a short nod, his weathered face softening. "Sometimes the best soldiers aren't." He turned back to Ethan. "You've been granted extended leave. Call it an unofficial retirement, if that's what you want." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're cutting me loose?" "I'm setting you free," Vance corrected. "You've done your duty. Maybe it's time you found something worth living for instead of something worth dying for." Ethan's gaze drifted to Grace and the dog at her side. "I think I already have." The old commander smiled faintly. "Then you're ahead of most men." He left them with a simple salute, one that meant more than medals ever could. That evening, as the sun sank behind the pines, Ethan, Grace, and Ranger climbed the hill behind the clinic. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine resin, the wind gentle now. They stopped near the overlook, where the town below shimmered with lamplight, every window glowing like a small promise. Grace sat on a fallen log, hands folded around a mug of coffee. "It's strange," she said. "Everything feels lighter, as if the town itself can finally breathe again." Ethan sat beside her. "That's what peace feels like. Doesn't mean the scars disappear. It just means they stop hurting every day." Ranger rested his head on Grace's lap, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. The snow beneath them gleamed pale gold as the sun slipped lower, scattering light like coins across the ridge. Ethan watched it for a long time before he spoke again, his voice low. "I used to think God abandoned the broken, but maybe he just sends us where we're needed most." Grace looked at him, her expression soft. "And what do you think he sent you here for?" He smiled faintly. "Not to rest, to find home." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Grace leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, saying nothing, because words would have been too small. Below them, Silver Ridge glowed, its streets no longer haunted, its future no longer stolen. And on that hill, 3 souls who had once been lost, the soldier, the healer, and the faithful dog, sat together under the fading sun, finding what they had been searching for all along: belonging. The storm had taken much, but it had left behind light. Sometimes God does not calm the storm. He simply walks with us through it. Ethan, Grace, and Ranger were 3 souls who had lost their way. Yet God used their pain to build something new, a family and a home. His miracles do not always come with thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive quietly through loyalty, kindness, and the courage to do what is right. In our own lives, we all face winters of fear and doubt, but if we keep faith and open our hearts, God will always send us light. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Today, leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from, and type, Amen if you believe that God's love still guides us through every storm. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and healing always.